The scream in the swamp. The air on Varnock 7 was thick. The sky was always dark, like storm clouds never left. The ground was wet and dangerous. Green fog moved slowly across the land, hiding everything. In the middle of this strange world was a swamp. But this was no normal swamp. It was full of thick, black slime that burned anything it touched. Locals called it death sludge. No one went near it. But today, someone was in trouble. A girl was sinking. Slowly, deeper and deeper. Her body shook. Her arms waved for help. Her eyes were wide with fear. She was not human. She was Varnockian, a race with blue skin, long fingers, and glowing eyes. Her name was Zira. Zira screamed again, louder this time. Help, please. But no one moved. A group of Varnockian soldiers stood at the edge of the swamp. They wore armor and held weapons, but their eyes were filled with fear. Don't go near, one of them said. The sludge will kill you. Another one looked away. She's already gone. Zira's screams became weaker. The black slime reached her chest. Then something happened. A voice, deep and strong, came from behind the trees. Get out of my way. Everyone turned. A human stepped forward. His armor was old, scratched, and covered in mud. A large rifle hung on his back. His name was Jake Carter, a soldier from Earth. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. He saw Zira sinking, and he didn't think twice. He dropped his rifle and ran. Wait, a Varnockian shouted. You'll die. But Jake didn't stop. He ran straight into the swamp. The moment his boots touched the sludge, it sizzled. Smoke rose. His legs burned. But he kept moving. Step by step, the sludge pulled at him, trying to drag him down. Jake gritted his teeth. Not today. Zira's head was barely above the surface now. She saw him coming. Why? Why are you helping me? Because I can, Jake said. He reached her just in time. His hands grabbed her arms. The sludge tried to keep her, but Jake pulled hard. Pain shot through his body, but he didn't stop. Hold on to me. Zira did. Her hands trembled, but she held on tight. Jake took one step back, then another. Each step felt like he was lifting a mountain. The sludge fought him. Behind them, the Varnockians watched in shock. None of them believed a human would do this. Not for an alien. Zira's body came free first, then Jake's knees, then waist. Almost there, he whispered. Finally, with one last scream of effort, he pulled them both out. They rolled onto the hard ground, coughing and shaking. Jake lay on his back, breathing hard. His legs were burned. Smoke rose from his armor. Zira looked at him with wide eyes. You saved me. Jake gave a small smile. Yeah, looks like it. One of the Varnockian soldiers stepped forward. You're lucky to be alive. Jake turned his head. She didn't have to die. You all just stood there. The soldier looked away. Zira sat up, still in shock. Why would a human risk his life for someone like me? Jake sat up slowly, wincing in pain. Because back home, I once failed to save someone. I swore I'd never let that happen again. Zira stared at him. You don't even know me. Jake looked her in the eyes. Don't need to. You were drowning. That was enough. The swamp behind them bubbled quietly. The black sludge rippled, like something had moved under it. Jake noticed. His smile faded. What was that? He asked. Zira shook her head. I don't know. The ground trembled. Just for a second. Jake stood up, slowly. His legs hurt, but he forced himself to move. He looked out at the sludge. The green fog rolled over it again, hiding whatever was inside. This place, Jake said, has more than just poison in its water. Zira nodded, her voice low. There are stories of something that lives down there, but no one has ever seen it. Jake picked up his rifle and helped Zira to her feet. Well, he said, I think it just saw us. They both stared into the mist, unsure of what was coming. But one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. Into the sludge. Jake Carter couldn't feel his legs. His armor hissed and steamed as he limped forward, carrying Zira on his shoulder. Her body was weak, but she was alive. The toxic sludge had burned his skin, soaked into his suit, and left angry red marks across his body. But Jake didn't care. He had done what no one else dared to do. He had pulled someone from the jaws of death. Still, something about the sludge felt wrong. It hadn't just tried to drown Zira. It had pulled her down, like something under the surface had grabbed her. And Jake had felt it too. A grip, a presence. Not just poison. Something alive. Minutes later, in a small tent near the edge of the swamp, Zira lay on a medical bed. Alien machines scanned her body. Jake stood beside her, shirt off, tending to his own wounds with a human medkit. His arms were burned. Blisters formed on his chest. The pain was sharp, but he didn't flinch. Pain was familiar. It made him feel real. Zira slowly opened her eyes. Her voice was soft. "You came for me." Jake looked at her. "Yeah, I guess I did." "Why?" she asked again. "You're human. I'm not." Jake looked down at his hands. They were shaking. Back home, there was a kid, caught in fire during a battle. I tried to get to her, but I was too late. Zira watched him silently. "I still hear her screams in my sleep," Jake continued. "I told myself, next time, I wouldn't hesitate, no matter who it is." Zira whispered, "You kept your promise." Jake nodded once. A sharp alarm beeped. One of the alien soldiers rushed inside. "The sludge is changing." Jake stood up quickly. "What do you mean?" The soldier pulled up a screen. A drone hovered over the swamp, sending back a live video. The sludge was bubbling, not just in one place, everywhere. Big bubbles, moving fast, like something under the surface was swimming, circling. Zira sat up, alarmed. "It's awake." Jake narrowed his eyes. "What is awake?" Zira looked at him. "We don't know. Our elders spoke of a creature. Long ago, it was buried beneath this swamp, alive. They say it's angry, and it waits." Jake crossed his arms. "Well, great. Seems like we just rang its doorbell." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He stood outside the camp, rifle in hand, staring at the swamp. The fog was thicker now. A deep green mist rolled over the land, covering everything. The bubbling had stopped, but the silence was worse. It was too quiet. Suddenly, a sound. Splash. Jake raised his rifle. Eyes focused. Heart steady. Splash. Again. Closer. He turned on his shoulder light. The beam cut through the fog and revealed a figure crawling from the edge of the swamp. It was one of the Varnokian scouts, but something was wrong. Its skin was dark, too dark. Its armor had melted. Its eyes were gone. Jake ran to him. "Hey, are you all right?" The scout coughed up black sludge. His voice was broken. It saw me." Jake knelt down. "What saw you?" The scout's head twitched. "It's awake. It's hungry. It's calling." Before Jake could ask more, the scout stopped breathing. A strange mark glowed on his neck, deep red, like a brand burned into flesh. Jake's hands tightened into fists. "We need to leave this place." Morning came with no sunlight, just fog. Jake stood in the command tent with Zira and the alien captain. "No one goes near the sludge again," Jake said firmly. "That thing, whatever it is, killed your scout last night." The captain hesitated. "We don't even know what it is." Zira stepped forward. "We do now." She tapped on the display screen. An old Varnokian symbol appeared. A large creature with many arms, rising from a black sea. Zira spoke slowly. "In our oldest legends, this was called the Maw, a creature from under the world. They said it was made of hate, and it feeds on fear. Jake's face turned serious. And we just gave it a taste. Zira nodded. It was asleep. But my scream, your rescue, the movement, it woke it up. Jake rubbed his jaw. So we go back in. Study it. Kill it if we have to. The captain shook his head. That's suicide. Jake smirked. I already did suicide yesterday. Today I just call it round 2. Zira looked at him. You're not like other humans. Jake smiled faintly. That's what they all say. Right before I make things explode. Later, Jake stood at the edge of the swamp again. This time, he was ready. He wore upgraded armor with both human and alien tech. A small flying drone hovered beside him, scanning the area. Zira was behind him, watching his every move. Jake turned back. You don't have to come. Zira replied, Neither do you. Jake nodded. Fair. Together, they stepped into the sludge again. Slowly, carefully. Every movement stirred the black goo. Every breath echoed in the quiet fog. Halfway in, the drone beeped. Zira checked the feed. Movement. Below us, Jake gripped his rifle. Get ready. Suddenly, the sludge rose. Not bubbled. Rose. Like something giant was pushing from beneath. A shape, long, wide, coiled, moved just under the surface. Jake's heart raced. He whispered, It's real. Zira's eyes widened. It's coming. Then the swamp exploded. The thing below. The swamp exploded. Black sludge shot high into the air, falling like rain. The sound was deafening, like a mountain cracking open. Jake and Zira were thrown back, landing hard in the mud. Their ears rang. Their suits sparked. For a moment, all they saw was darkness and fog. Then, they saw it. Rising from the swamp was something huge. Not just big, but impossible. A shape that seemed to twist the air around it. Its body was made of black, shifting sludge, but underneath bones glowed red like molten lava. It had no eyes, no mouth, yet it looked at them. Zira gasped. The maw. Jake lifted his rifle. Hell just got a face. The creature made no sound, but they could feel it scream. It echoed in their heads, like 1,000 voices whispering at once. Zira staggered back. Her nose bled. It's in my mind. Jake fired. The bullets hit the sludge, but the creature didn't flinch. The wounds closed instantly. Figures, Jake muttered. It's bulletproof sludge. The maw moved toward them, slow but steady. Each step melted the ground. Plants died. Rocks cracked. The fog grew thicker around it, turning dark green and choking. Jake grabbed Zira's arm. Run. They ran through the swamp, slipping, sliding, dodging roots and rocks. The maw followed, not fast, but always moving, like it knew they couldn't escape forever. Jake tapped his comm. Base, this is Carter. We've got a Class 0 threat. It's real. It's awake, and it's coming. Static. He cursed. Of course. Zira pointed ahead. That ridge, if we get over it, we can hide in the caves. Jake nodded. They pushed harder. Behind them, the maw roared, not with sound, but with raw energy. Trees collapsed. Water boiled. They reached the ridge just as a massive tentacle slammed down behind them, shaking the ground. Rocks fell. Jake pushed Zira forward. Go. I'll hold it back. No. Zira grabbed his arm. We go together. Another tentacle rose. It struck a tree beside them, splitting it in half like paper. Jake turned and fired again, this time using a plasma grenade launcher. The grenade hit the sludge and exploded in a burst of fire and light. The maw screamed. This time, they heard it. A low, bone-cracking sound that shook the sky. It wasn't hurt, just annoyed. Jake and Zira dove into the cave just in time. The entrance was narrow. The creature couldn't follow. Not yet. Inside, They collapsed. Their suits were damaged. Jake's shoulder bled. Zira's hands shook. For a long moment, they said nothing, just breathed. The cave was cold, wet, dark. Zira lit a small energy orb. Blue light filled the space. Jake sat against the wall, wincing. So, that's the maw. Zira nodded. We weren't supposed to wake it. Jake looked at her. Why was it buried? What did your people do? Zira hesitated. Long ago, we tried to kill it. Our scientists thought they could control it, use it as a weapon, but it turned on them. Jake raised an eyebrow. Of course it did. Smart move. She looked down. We buried it here, hoping it would stay asleep forever. Jake scoffed. That never works. Monsters don't sleep forever. They just wait. Zira looked at him. You don't seem scared. Jake gave a tired smile. I'm always scared. I just don't let it win. There was silence again. Then Jake spoke softly. When I was a kid, I used to hide under my bed during storms. Thought if I didn't look, the monsters wouldn't see me. Zira smiled faintly. Did it work? Jake shrugged. Nope. Got bitten once. Turned out it was a rat. They both laughed. For a moment, the fear faded. Then Zira's face turned serious. We can't outrun it forever. Jake nodded. I know. We need a plan. Zira pulled out a small device. I have something. A memory core. From our ancient research, it may contain data on how to weaken the maw. Jake leaned forward. Why didn't you mention this earlier? I didn't know if it still worked. She powered it on. A hologram flickered, then stabilized. An old Varnokian scientist appeared, speaking in their language. Subtitles auto-translated. We created a failsafe, a sonic weapon that could disturb its form, but it was too unstable. The test killed everyone in the lab. Jake grinned. Now we're talking. Zira scrolled further. The weapon was hidden in Outpost Theta 9. We sealed it there, far across the sludge fields. Jake stood up. Then that's where we're going. Zira hesitated. It's not that simple. The sludge fields are wide, open, and the maw controls them now. Jake checked his ammo. Then we go quietly, one move at a time. Zira looked at him. You're really not scared, are you? Jake looked into her glowing eyes. I am. But fear means you care. And I care about surviving. Zira smiled. You humans are strange. Jake smirked. You have no idea. Outside the cave, the maw waited. Silent. Still. Watching. Then, it moved back into the swamp. It didn't need to chase them. It knew where they were going. And it would be waiting. Run through the black fog. The sun never rose on Varnock 7. It simply grew less dark. That morning, Jake and Zira stood at the cave's mouth, staring across the swamp fields. In front of them was a dead, silent landscape. No birds, no wind, only the thick green-black fog that curled along the ground like it was alive. The path to Outpost Theta 9 lay ahead, across a flat, open stretch of poisoned earth and sludge pools. No cover, no backup, only danger. Jake checked his gear. Half a clip of plasma rounds, one backup energy cell. Grenade launcher still working. Barely. His suit had patches over the burns, but every step still hurt. Zira wore her light scout armor, patched with human duct tape and alien thread. She clutched the memory core with one hand and a stun rifle in the other. Once we leave this cave, she whispered, there's no turning back. Jake didn't look at her. He stared into the fog, wasn't planning on turning around anyway. Then he stepped forward, right into the black fog. Zira followed. The fog wasn't normal. It moved against the wind. It crept into their suits. It made the air feel heavier, like they were breathing through wet cloth. Every 10 steps, Jake marked a rock with his laser cutter. So we don't walk in circles, he explained. Zira walked close behind, glancing left and right. Do you hear it? Jake stopped. Then he heard it too. Whispers. They weren't words, just soft, cold sounds, like voices underwater. They came from everywhere. From behind, from ahead, from inside their helmets. Zira gripped her rifle tighter. It's the maw. Jake nodded slowly. It wants us to panic. Is it working? Little bit. They kept walking. The silence around them twisted. Time felt slow. Even light seemed to bend oddly inside the fog. Shadows appeared, then vanished. Once, Jake swore he saw a figure moving far off. But when he turned, it was gone. Then something worse happened. Zira stopped. Her voice was quiet. Jake. He turned. She was staring at something floating just ahead. It was a body. A human soldier. Face down. Half sunken in the sludge. Jake's eyes narrowed. No one else came this way. That can't be real. Zira stepped forward slowly. Jake reached out. Zira. Wait. But she didn't stop. She got closer to the body. Her eyes grew wide. Her hand moved toward it. The soldier turned. Fast. Its eyes were empty. Its mouth opened, far too wide, and black sludge spilled out. Jake grabbed Zira and yanked her back. It's a trick. The body melted into smoke and fog, vanishing like it had never been there. Zira fell to her knees, shaking. It showed me my brother. My real brother, who died years ago. Jake helped her up. It's using memories. Fear. Guilt. He looked around. This whole place is its mind, and we're walking through its thoughts. Zira took a deep breath. Then we walked faster. They ran. Hours passed. At least it felt like hours. The fog never cleared. The whispers never stopped. Once, Zira heard her name being called by her mother's voice, though her mother had been dead for 10 years. Jake kept his mind busy with movement. Step. Scan. Mark. Step. Then the fog began to shift color. It turned darker, near black. The whispers stopped. Jake froze. This is new. Zira checked her scanner. We're close to outpost Theta 9. Maybe half a kilometer. Jake lowered his voice. Or maybe it wants us to think that. Suddenly, the fog ahead opened, and they saw a forest. It shouldn't have been there. There were no trees on this part of Varnock 7, and yet there it was. Dozens of tall, black trees, covered in slime, standing silently like statues. Zira whispered, I've read about this. They called it the Gravewood. Jake raised an eyebrow. Nice name. Real friendly. The maw grew it, from the bones of the dead. Jake didn't reply. They stepped into the forest. Inside the Gravewood, it was even darker. The trees blocked what little light remained. The ground was soft, spongy, like walking on rotting flesh. Then the trees moved. Not a lot, just a shift, like they were breathing. Zira's eyes darted around. I come like this. Jake held up a fist. Stop. Ahead, something moved. A shape. Fast. Low. Then another. Eyes, red and glowing, appeared between the trees. Company, Jake whispered. Dozens of small creatures stepped into the open. They were made of the same black sludge as the maw, but shaped like wolves. If wolves had too many teeth and no skin. Run, Zira asked. Jake sighed. Always. They sprinted. The creatures gave chase, growling like machines grinding metal. Jake threw a flash grenade. The explosion of light stunned a few, but not for long. They ran through twisted roots, ducked under low branches, jumped over sludge pits. Zira slipped. A creature leaped. Jake spun and shot it midair. The blast tore it apart. He helped her up. Stay close. They burst out of the Gravewood and saw it. Outpost Theta 9. A half-sunken base made of steel and black stone. Its walls were cracked. One side was collapsed into a sinkhole, but it was real. They reached the front doors. Locked. Jake slammed a fist on the panel. Come on. Zira held up the memory core. Let me try. The creatures were close, snarling. Dozens now. Zira plugged the core in. The doors hissed, then opened. They dove inside. The doors shut with a clang. Silence. Darkness. Then, lights flickered on. They were inside. Safe. For now. Zira collapsed against the wall. Jake stood, rifle ready. He looked down the long hallway of the outpost and muttered, "Time to find a weapon big enough to kill a god." The human secret. The lights inside Outpost Theta 9 flickered like dying stars. The air was thick with dust and age. Every metal wall was rusted. Every hallway echoed with silence. It was clear no one had stepped inside this place for many years. Jake walked slowly, rifle raised, eyes scanning every shadow. Zira followed behind, her boots crunching over broken glass. She held the memory core tight in her hand. "This place doesn't feel abandoned," she whispered. Jake nodded. "Feels like it's waiting." The door sealed shut behind them with a heavy clang. They were locked in. They moved through the first corridor, past old weapons lockers, shattered display panels, and signs written in human military code. Project Null. Authorized it. Onloy. Zira stopped in front of one. What was Project Null? Jake frowned. It was classified. Top-level stuff. Even I don't know the full details. They entered a control room. In the center sat a dusty mainframe surrounded by curved walls and shattered monitors. Wires hung like vines. Most of the screens were dead. Jake wiped dust off a console. Zira slid the memory core into a slot. The system hummed. Lights flickered. Then a voice came from the speakers, old, robotic, and human. "Welcome back. Identity match. Commander Jacob Carter, Earth Special Forces. Clearance level. Black Star." Zira turned. "Commander." Jake sighed. "A long time ago. Do you wish to access Project Null records?" Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah. Show me everything." The screen came to life. FILE1. Project and ULL. Purpose. Project Null was created to design weapons against unknown, non-physical threats. The Maw was the first. Zira leaned in. "Wait." The humans knew about the Maw. Jake's face hardened. "Not just knew. We studied it." FILE2. First CONTACT with THE Mayo. A video played. A team of scientists in hazmat suits stood on a cliff overlooking a bubbling swamp. A black tentacle slowly rose from the water. One man stepped forward, holding a strange device. "We're detecting signals. It thinks. It feels. We might be able to communicate." Then the screen glitched. Screams followed. The tentacle moved too fast. Blood splashed the camera. Static. FILE3. The weapon. Another screen opened. Project Null weapon. Sonic implosion core. Designed to disrupt entities made of energy, memory, and fluid matter. Tested once. Result: 100% target destruction. 100% team loss. Zira whispered. They built something that could kill the Maw. Jake stared at the screen. And it killed them too. The screen blinked again. Location of weapon core. Lower Lab 03. Zira stood. "Then that's where we go." Jake looked toward the lower levels. Blackness. They descended the stairs carefully. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The walls turned from metal to black rock. Old warning signs lined the stairs. Danger. Unstable energy field. Do not enter or without containment suit. Jake muttered. "Feels like we're walking into a tomb." Zira replied. "A tomb with a weapon inside." They'd reached the lower lab. The doors were sealed with 6 heavy locks. Jake worked on the panel while Zira scanned the walls. Strange symbols were burned into the stone. Symbols she didn't recognize. Not human, not Varnokian. She touched one. It burned her hand. She yanked it back, eyes wide. These aren't just markings. They're alive. Jake got the final lock open. The door hissed. It slid open with a long groan, revealing a massive chamber. In the center, a black sphere floating in midair, surrounded by rings of metal and glowing wires. The sonic implosion core. Jake stepped inside. The weapon pulsed slowly, like it had a heartbeat. Zira's voice was soft. "It's beautiful." Jake replied, "It's death." He approached the weapon. A control console sat nearby, covered in warning lights. "Warning. Activating weapon will cause total energy collapse in a 2-mile radius. Use only as last resort." Zira whispered, "If we use it here, we'll die too." Jake looked at the screen, then at her. "I've already died once inside that swamp," he said. "This time, I'd rather choose how I go." They began prepping the core for transport. Zira linked her scanner to the weapon, rerouting its power into a containment module. It glowed brighter with every passing second. Then, a loud crack echoed from above. Jake froze. What was that? Zira checked the scanner. Movement. Above us. It's inside the outpost. Jake cursed. It found us. The maw was here, and it was coming. Back in the upper halls, lights flickered. Metal groaned. The black fog poured in through vents and cracks, flooding the base. Something moved inside it, twisting, massive, hungry. Jake and Zira rushed back up the stairs, the weapon core floating beside them, tethered to Zira's scanner by glowing wires. Behind them, the fog chased. It wasn't just fog anymore. It was the maw. They reached the main hallway, just 20 meters from the exit. Then the ground in front of them cracked open. The maw rose. It filled the space with its black, shifting mass. Tentacles reached for them. Ice formed and vanished on its surface. Teeth grew from nothing, then melted. Zira screamed, "There's no time." Jake looked at the core. "Can we detonate it now?" Zira shouted, "Not yet. 10 more seconds." The maw roared. Jake stepped forward. He fired his last grenade, straight into the creature's face. The blast lit up the hall. The maw reeled back, only slightly. Jake yelled, "Zira, go." She pulled the trigger. The core began to hum, louder and louder. The maw surged forward. Jake turned to Zira. "Take it and run." "No, I'm not leaving you." Jake grabbed her by the shoulder. "This is my choice. Tell them. Tell your people what we did." He shoved her toward the emergency hatch, then turned to face the monster. Zira reached the hatch, tears in her eyes, the core glowing in her hands. She looked back one last time. Jake stood tall, alone. Then, white light, a sound like the sky tearing apart. Everything vanished. Last stand in the sludge fields. There was no sound, no light, just floating. Zira drifted in empty space, her body numb, her mind echoing with the last image burned into her memory. Jake, standing alone, facing the maw, as the sonic implosion core exploded in a burst of white light. She had escaped through the emergency tunnel, barely making it outside the base before the detonation shook the ground. She didn't remember crawling across the broken field, clutching the core fragments, coughing up black fog. She only remembered one thing. He stayed behind. And now he was gone. Days passed. Maybe. Time didn't work right on Varnock 7. Zira woke inside a Varnokian recovery dome. Her body had been stabilized. Her mind, broken. The scientists tried asking questions. What happened at Outpost Theta 9? What did you see? What was the weapon? She ignored them all. Until they asked the question that mattered. What happened to the human? Zira closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "He saved me," she whispered. "He saved all of us." But peace didn't come. The maw wasn't dead. Weakened, yes. Wounded, maybe, but not destroyed. Across the sludge fields, tremors began again. The fog returned, thicker, darker, filled with rage. Scouts vanished. Drones melted. The maw had survived. And now it was angry. Zira stood alone on the ridge near the swamp's edge, the same place where Jake had first heard her scream. She looked over the poisoned land, her armor now reinforced with both Varnokian plating and Earth tech. On her back was a new version of the implosion core, smaller, more stable, a last resort. In her hand was Jake's dog tag, burned, bent, all that remained of him. Or so she thought, because then she heard a voice, rough, familiar, behind her. "Did you miss me?" Zira spun around. Her heart nearly stopped. Standing in the fog, covered in burns, armor shredded, eyes blazing. Jake Carter. Alive. He looked like a ghost, but he was breathing. Zira ran to him, her voice cracking. "You're alive, how?" Jake smirked, tired. "The blast didn't kill me. Threw me into the lower tunnels. Knocked me out. I woke up next to a pile of broken bones and a real angry headache." Zira grabbed his arm. "You should have signaled us." "I tried, but the fog messed with everything. Took me days to crawl out. I've been watching the swamp since I got out." Jake's face grew serious. "It's not just alive anymore. It's evolving." Together, they returned to the command dome. Jake limped in, and the Varnokian scientists stared in shock. "It's him," someone whispered. "The human." Jake stood at the center of the war table. The map of Varnock 7 glowed red. Every area near the sludge was marked with danger. Jake spoke clearly. "This thing doesn't want to kill us anymore. It wants to become us. It's absorbing DNA. Learning." Zira added, "And it remembers everything. Every voice, every face, every fear." Jake looked around the room. "This ends now." Silence. Then the Varnokian commander stepped forward. "You want to fight a god?" Jake nodded. "No, I want to kill it. The final plan. Operation Firestorm. Lure the maw to the center of the sludge fields. Trap it inside a ring of sonic beacons. Activate the second core, overload it from the inside. Detonate. Suicide mission. Definitely." But Jake didn't blink. "I've already died once," he said. "Second time's on my terms." Zira volunteered to go with him. Of course she did. "Someone has to keep you from doing something stupid," she said. Jake smiled. "Like saving you from alien slime." Zira grinned. "Exactly." The final day came. The fog was thicker than ever. The ground trembled as the maw moved beneath it. The sky turned dark red. Zira and Jake stood side by side, just outside the swamp. In their suits, sonic dampeners, plasma cores, last dose medical injectors. Between them, the new implosion core, humming with deadly power. "Last chance to run," Jake said. Zira looked at him. "After everything we've seen, I'd rather run into the fire." Jake laughed. "I knew I liked you." Then they stepped forward. The fog swallowed them. The maw knew they were coming. It rose from the center of the sludge, taller than before. Its body had changed. No longer just sludge. It had form, shape. Humanoid. Almost human. Jake froze. It had copied him. A twisted version of Jake's face stared back at him from the creature's chest. Zira whispered, "It's becoming you." Jake raised his rifle. "Then it's about to meet the real thing." The fight began. Sonic beacons activated, sending shockwaves through the swamp. The maw screamed, its body twisting and shifting. Jake fired plasma blasts, carving holes into its mass. Zira activated the core and dodged the flying sludge. Tentacles lashed out. Jake took a hit, his arm breaking. He screamed but kept shooting. Zira climbed the rocks behind the creature, reaching the high ground. She called out, "Now!" Jake charged. With his good arm, he shoved the implosion core into the center of the creature's chest, right into its copy of him. The maw roared in agony. Jake looked into its shifting eyes. No more running. He pressed the detonation key. Zira screamed, "Jake!" A blast of light. A wave of sound. The earth shook. The swamp boiled. The fog vanished. Zira woke up in a crater. The sky was clear. Blue. For the first time in Varnock 7's history. She looked around. The swamp was gone. Burned. Dried. No sign of the maw. No sign of Jake. She screamed his name. Again. And again. Silence. Then. A cough. From beneath broken rubble. She ran. Dug. And there he was. Alive. Barely. Burned. Bruised. But smiling. Zira helped him up. He looked around. Did we win? Zira nodded, tears in her eyes. We did. He grinned. Told you. Second deaths on my terms. He saved me. Now I save him. The sky had changed. Varnock 7, once dark and cursed with never-ending fog, now shimmered with light. A pale blue sky stretched above the land, cracked open by sacrifice, lit by courage. The maw was gone. The swamp was silent. And for the first time in centuries, the planet was breathing again. Zira stood outside the medical bay, watching through the glass. Jake Carter lay still inside, covered in bandages, hooked to both Varnockian and human machines. His chest rose and fell slowly. His body had survived the blast, but just barely. The doctor said he might not wake up. Too much damage, too much stress. But Zira didn't accept that. He had saved her life. Now it was her turn. 3 days passed. She never left his side. She replayed the memory over and over. The moment Jake shoved the implosion core into the maw, looked the monster in the eye, and chose to end it, knowing he might die. That was what it meant to be human, she realized. Not strength, not weapons. Choice. On the 4th day, Jake opened his eyes. Barely. Zira jumped up, tears in her eyes. Jake. He blinked slowly. Did we win? Zira laughed and cried at the same time. Yes, we won. Jake smiled weakly. Good. I really didn't want to do that again. Zira leaned close. You're safe. Rest. Jake looked at her. His voice was rough, but clear. You stayed. Zira nodded. Of course. Jake whispered. Thanks for saving me. Zira smiled. You saved me first. 1 week later, Jake walked for the first time. With help. His legs were weak, his body scarred, but he stood tall. Across the base, both humans and Varnockians gathered. Soldiers, scientists, even high command. They had all come to see him. The human who faced the maw. The alien he saved. The two who ended a curse together. The commander of the Varnockian forces stepped forward. You have done what our people could not for 1,000 years. You did not just kill the maw. You changed us. He turned to Zira. And you reminded us that bravery knows no race. The crowd stood in silence. Then applause. Louder, louder. Zira looked at Jake. He was smiling, but not for the praise. For her. Later, under the now clear sky, Jake and Zira walked across the ridge where everything began. The place where she had once screamed for help. And he had answered. Zira said softly, My people want peace with yours. They've asked me to be the voice that speaks for us. Jake looked at her. They picked the right voice. And Earth wants you to come home, she added. Jake looked out at the horizon. Home feels far away. Zira tilted her head. So, what will you do? Jake turned to her. He held out something. His dog tag. I think I'll stay. At least for a while. Build something better. Here. Zira smiled. Together. Jake nodded. Yeah, together. Weeks later, the swamp fields had been cleared. A memorial now stood at the center, made of black stone and silver metal. On it were two names. Zira of Varn Oak. Jake Carter of Earth. Beneath, the words, Fear kept us apart. Bravery brought us together. Children from both species played nearby. No more fog. No more whispers. Only life. Somewhere, deep underground, a cracked piece of sludge pulsed once. Then went still. Not dead. Sleeping. Watching. But that is a story for another time.